Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion, which you might be able to see around me and in front of me today, tropical houseplants. So it's going to be another continuation, so it's a 2 review week for everybody, so lucky everybody who likes the review series. We're going to be talking today about the Philodendron Pink Princess, and let me bring it up a bit more so you can see some of its splendor. I'll bring it up again a bit later on in the video, but let's get some groundwork first. And for the people that have come back, welcome. And for the new people, welcome to the fun, essentially. For the people that have come back, if you don't want to see this section here, I will put some chapters down below in the little scroll bar on the video so you can skip to the first section that you want to watch, basically. But for everybody else that's new, essentially what happens during this review series is I will take a plant that I've had in my care for a while and I will talk about my experiences. Now, as I always caveat this, these experiences are going to be biased to myself, in my conditions, in my environment, with the care that I give this plant. For people that might only just be joining now, I'm based in the UK, so a lot of what I'm talking about is probably going to be quite relevant to both the UK market and the European market. Now, what this review is, in essence, is a place where everybody can come and have a check and see, maybe before they buy the plant or after they've just bought a plant, my experiences. Hopefully the people that have had this for a while will share their experiences down below, because there's not any place that we can go and check out reviews on how it is living with a plant after you've purchased it for a while and what the potential for pests might be or how large it can grow, all of these things. And these are topics that I cover within these reviews. So there'll usually be some background on the plant. There'll also be a section about speed of growth, how easy the plant is to propagate, what the availability is for the plant. And again, this is going to be relevant to my situation. So based in the UK, Europe generally tends to be quite similar to the UK when it comes to availability. And also, I will encourage you, if you're seeing this for the first time and it's years later, check the date below, because some of the availability points might not be relevant anymore. And then we talk about pests, pressures potentially on this plant. And then moving on from that, I'll do some final thoughts, which I'll give a score, my own personal score, for how I've found having this plant in my collection. But without further ado, let's dive into the first topic. So into the background for this plant, and I will lift it up again, and you can see the leaves of this white princess. You can see some of the smaller leaves here, and I will touch on this in a minute. Some of the older leaves, and also some of the original leaves potentially that are now crisping up. And I will talk about the crispiness in a bit. But yeah, for the people that have been here for a while, janky support sticks for the win. And for the people that have been here for the conservatory tour, you know why I'm looking up. But you can see I've got it in terracotta. It's a very small pot for the size of the plant. It's in an aroid soil mix. And let me just put it down really quickly so we can talk a bit easier. The other thing to bear in mind about this plant is the fact that it can actually grow in an interesting way, and I'll touch a bit more about that later on in terms of how the stem goes. And that's probably why you can see this plant is a bit top heavy, basically, and I'm trying not to move it around too much so it doesn't snap. But background on this plant is when I first purchased it, and it was from a local plant store, and again, I can't remember the date of this, but hopefully the video title will have the dates. I will also, as usual, put a picture here of what the plant looked like when I first got it in my care. And as I always say, this is from a plant care app, so the picture is not going to be fantastic, but you get the gist of what the plant looked like when I first got it. And yeah, it was a plant that I got from a local plant store. I think I physically went to pick it up. I'm not entirely sure with that one, but this was a plant that I was a bit hesitant because of the plant that this is related to, and let me pick that up. So the plant that it's related to, and this might not come to surprise to a lot of people, is the Philodendron Pink Princess. And you might be able to see a bit of pink there, and I'm trying to see if there's any other leaves, and there's another tiny little leaf there that's like a half moon. But as most people who have got a pink princess, and I am going to poo-poo all over this plant right now, it's probably closer to say that it's a brown princess. It's a plant, and this is why I was hesitating between getting the white princess, because I'm just sitting there going, I don't want to spend an awful lot of money for another plant that's probably just going to end up, I knew that this was more green anyway than the kind of muddy browny color that you get with the pink princess. But I don't want to get another plant that's not going to have an awful lot of the other color. So in this case, the white that you get on the white princess in relation to the rest of the leaf. Luckily, that wasn't the case. Let me put down the pink princess because it's in a self-watering Lechuza pot and it's exceptionally heavy. Luckily, that wasn't the case with this, so I did decide to still purchase this plant. Now, in full transparency, the plant that I originally wanted to get, which is a very similar look and feel, because essentially you get the white princess, you get the white wizard, and the white knight. And I think the one that I was after originally, it's going to be one of the white wizard or the white knight. I think it was the white wizard that I was looking for, but that one was a lot harder to find. And to be entirely blunt, a lot of these three plants look very similar to each other. I know before anybody comes to me that there are definitely some differences when it comes to petiole sheaths and the stem and all of these things. But in essence, the leaves can be very, very similar, at least to my eye. But yeah, and I picked it up from a local plant store. It was a relatively non-eventful pickup. Essentially, it was a plant that they had in store. We'll talk a bit more of availability at that point. How it's been to care for. I've given it bright indirect light. It's kind of getting on the shelf behind me. You might have been able to see it at the bottom sometimes on some of my videos. It is also another plant that I generally don't tend to move around too much. A, because you saw how much it was flopping. And yeah, the support sticks are doing their mostest to keep this plant in one bit rather than snapped, basically. And actually, let me show you now, might as well, so you can understand what I'm talking about. So you might be able to see the size of that stem when it was growing is probably about the thickness of my finger. But then if you look higher up, and I'll show you what the stem looks like there, and I don't know whether or not it's going to come out well in the camera, it's very, very thick. It's almost twice as thick. And you do get this a lot of the times with some philodendron where when it's starting off at the base, it's very, very thin. I'm thinking about my Philodendron Eximium as well, which I'm looking at the top there. The stem at the very bottom, which is holding everything up, is kind of pinky size in terms of thickness. And the very top, it's probably like 4 times the width of it as well. So it does end up making these plants very top heavy. Now, I know I could just chop and propagate, but I'd like a bigger plant basically. But that is something that you need to bear in mind with a lot of these plants, is that you definitely need to give it some good support, because that I found, at least with a lot of these philodendron type plants, is that the stem at the bottom will only reach so much width basically in relation to the top. So bear that in mind. But yeah, this is one that I don't tend to move out of where it is too much, because it's also not just on a support stick, it's tied to the shelf so that it keeps upright. But yeah, and I think that was it with this one. I don't think there's anything more in terms of background. It was a relatively straightforward pickup. We'll talk about availability in a moment. Yeah, let's dive into the next topic. So, speed of growth with this one. And this is an interesting one, and I will benchmark it throughout the video a bit with the Pink Princess, because it's the easiest comparison that I can give it, because they are very, very closely related. I find that this plant specifically is a much faster grower than the Philodendron Pink Princess. To be fair, neither one of them is a particularly slow grower, at least it hasn't been in my experience. So I would say, and again, using the benchmark of the pothos in this room. So the pothos, if it's getting 2 or 3 leaves a month, this one might get 1 leaf, maybe 2 leaves in the month. Like 2 would probably be in the spring, summertime, 1 would be in the winter time. However, I will say one thing, and again, this might just be my experience. I'd be really curious to see what your experiences are if you've had this plant. When I took the first cutting from this plant, and I will show you that propagate in a moment, it really, and granted I did take it in the winter, it really delayed the growth from restarting again on this plant specifically. It also then caused, and you saw some of the crisping earlier on that I showed you on the original white variegated sections. It also was pristinely white. The nothing was changing, and I was so super glad because I had nice, lovely, huge white sections on the leaves, and they were there for a very long period of time, and nothing was happening to them. The moment that I took the cutting, and I experienced this with my Monstera albo as well, is the moment where all the really large, chunky white bits turned crispy. So something to bear in mind there with this plant. And generally, I'm trying to figure out now if that happens a lot with the albo variegated, the lily white variegated plants. When you take a cutting, does the next bit of growth that comes in cause some of the other whiter bits further down on the plant to crisp up? So far, based on a couple of plants that I've seen, I would say yes. So something to bear in mind there. But yeah, relatively fast grower. For what it is, essentially it's a variegated philodendron. For a variegated philodendron, it is a relatively fast grower. It's not super, super fast, but not slow by any chance. Moving on to ease of propagation, and let me pick up the propagation that I took from this plant and I will show you. So this was the original cutting that I took, and I'm thinking it was just the one cutting. I'm trying to remember now if there's another version of this plant somewhere. I don't think there is. So it was just the one cutting that I took, and it was obviously a top cutting. What you might be able to see that I've done there is I took off quite a considerable amount of the leaf, and I don't know whether or not I would do this again with this specific plant because I was to take off the white sections, and you can see this was a full half moon. And I know a lot of people will cringe at the fact that I cut off the entire white section when it wasn't crisping on a half moon leaf. But it was just getting too top heavy like I was talking about before. And essentially I put it in some pon in self-watering so it can start rooting out. Granted, I have found that that roots out slower than other methods potentially, but there has been some growth. It did take a while to get going. I don't think it was because the propagate, it was a problem because the propagation takes too long. I don't think the grow lights that I had this under were particularly bright. And also not only that, not only were they not particularly bright, this was propagating next to some albo monstera leaves, which by the end of it ended up covering most of the grow lights. So it probably wasn't getting as much light as it needed. I have since moved it to a better position now, and I am seeing it kind of really kicking into gear again. Obviously, it was coming into like the spring, summer months now, so there is that to kind of bear in mind as well. But the very, very cool thing, and hopefully that will pick up on the camera, I will do a B-roll on this one as well. You might be able to see the stem there and the petiole actually specifically, the level of white, and you do get a really cool candy striping thing. I'm trying to see now whether or not you might be able, if it's going to pick up on some of these, you might be able to see a bit of a pink line. It's really interesting, and I think it will probably show up there a bit more. Yeah, there you go. It's really interesting because actually a lot of the times you'll get a white princess that has splashes of pink on it, and you can really see the connection with the pink princess at that point. Now, I don't know whether or not they've given it its own name now, and I'm assuming they're charging more for things like this because it's a bit more rare. The way that I understood it, and especially when I saw it in stores before this became a thing, a lot of the plants that were coming in from the nurseries, at least here from the Netherlands, I would imagine, there was a lot of them that had those pink splashes on them, and the shops were charging them the same as they would a regular white princess. So take from that what you will. I don't know. I've never had one of those ones specifically, but I don't think it would be entirely... I might be wrong. Correct me if you've got one of the ones that have got a pink splash. I don't know whether or not that can happen on any white princess potentially. And I don't know whether or not if he does have a pink splash, if that will continue throughout the plant or if it's just the one leaf that just happened to get that by chance, essentially. But yeah, coming back to the propagation side of things, relatively straightforward to propagate, at least in my experience. Moving on to availability, and I did say I was going to come back to this now. So the availability on this one is quite interesting, and it was when I first got it. It is a... you see me struggle here. It is a plant that can be challenging to find even here in the UK and Europe. But like the Thai constellation, and I have done a review on the Thai constellation as well, and I'll link it up the top there. This I find tends to come in waves on the market, and it's because I think it's coming in from the nurseries in the Netherlands, and I'm assuming they don't want to flood the market. I'm assuming they probably have quite a few of these, and I'm assuming they want to keep the prices relatively high. I don't think the price of these plants has come down considerably since they first hit the UK market in stores from the nurseries. And I think this would have been high double digits, low triple digits at that point. It might be slightly lower now, but I don't think it's gone down by that much. Granted, I think if you're going to find like maybe rooted cuttings of this on things like eBay, they might be cheaper, I would imagine. But yeah, for a slightly more full plant, like the plant that I would have hopefully shown you, I think I did, in the background section of what it looked like on my plant care app, then yeah, there is going to be that price that goes with it. In terms of availability, you saw me struggling before. There's a flux of them that comes into the market, not huge by any stretch of the imagination. I'd say probably more so than maybe the Thai constellation. But then they get sold out, and then you have to wait for a next batch unless you're getting a propagate, basically. So, and again, this has always got the caveat of that's what it was at the time of filming this, so definitely double check the date. But yeah, I mean, I get it. It's one of those plants, and I think there's not that many people that are necessarily searching for it as often as they might be doing for the Pink Princess. Arguably, after having both for a while now, I don't get that. I would much rather search for this plant than the Pink Princess. Enough poo-pooing on the Pink Princess. But yeah, it's available at times, let's put it that way. Now, going into pests for this plant. And I will say as well that with the pests that I've seen on this one, the occasional spider mite, the occasional mealybug, and that can be a pain because it's got all the nooks and crannies from when the leaves are coming on the petioles from the stem, and they've got the sheath, so you do get some mealybugs going, and at least in my experience, in those nooks and crannies. But nothing that grows exponentially on this plant. So for me, that is a positive. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that there's a lot of pests that won't go on it, but at least in my experience, they haven't proliferated really, really quickly. So something to bear in mind with that one. But yeah, okay, generally, I would say in terms of pests. Moving on to final thoughts for this plant. Now, a couple of things, and I think I did show this earlier on. That was the first leaf that came in after the cutting was taken, so it's relatively small, but it still had a decent level of variegation. But you can see within first leaf, second leaf, third leaf, fourth leaf, I'm pretty much back to the original big size almost of the plant before I took the cutting. So it does happen quite quickly. You just need to, and this has been my experience with this, and you just need to bear with that kind of slow rebound time. I will say again, I did it in the winter, so it might have been that as well. But coming back to the final thoughts, as always, if I knew what I knew now about this plant, but I didn't have it, would I purchase it? Yes, I would purchase this plant. It has given me a lot of joy, a lot more joy than the Pink Princess. It's got a lot more variegation on it. Whether or not this is going to become a plant that's similar to the Pink Princess, where a lot of them are going to get sold and propagated, and the genetics eventually are going to weaken to the point where you don't get as much of that variegation coming through, because that's the thing with the Pink Princess. If you see some of the Pink Princesses that were being sold 4 to 5 years ago when not a lot of people were looking for them, the level of the pink variegation, because it was a stronger genetic makeup within those plants, was very high. But because everybody has since propagated and propagated again from propagates and propagates from propagates, that's got watered down. So a lot of the plants that we're getting now on the market, there's not an awful lot of pink. And yes, it can happen even if you have a whole plant without the pink. But yeah, but this one, as it stands at the moment, has got some good genetics. You saw some of the candy striping that I was showing you on the propagate as well, and it's the same throughout the whole of this plant. It's very cool to see that kind of green and white. So definitely a plant that I would pick up, knowing what I know now. Would I do things slightly differently? Probably, but I would definitely pick it up. Now, in terms of a score from 0 to 10, 0 being the worst, 10 being the best, this would probably get a solid 7, I would say. Mainly because, and it would have been higher had I not realized, and it might not be just this plant, as I was saying, it might be the other kind of albo variegated plants as well. I keep pointing behind the camera because that's where my albo sits. But that crisping that happens on the entire white sections when you take the cutting, it kind of soured me a bit. As I said, it's not just this plant. But other than that, a really strong contender of a plant, not just a philodendron, but a very interesting one to look at. I also find that the growth habit tends to be a bit more uniform and a bit more compact than the pink princess. The pink princess for me tends to get very lanky very quickly. This one doesn't tend to do the same necessarily. But yeah, I think that's the majority of what I wanted to say about this plant. I'd be really, really curious to see if you've got some of your own reviews on this plant. If you wouldn't mind sharing them in the comments down below, I'm sure I'd want to see what your experience has been as well as other people here. But yeah, a strong, strong plant. And I would say if you do find one and you do want to get it, go for it. Like the pricing isn't exorbitant, at least not here. I don't know where you are, but it is a very, very cool plant. And I can definitely confirm, I think out of most of my white variegated plants, this has truly got that lily white variegation. And it seems to, yeah, it seems to come out on this plant in a really interesting way. And that candy striping on the stem is to die for. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.